Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second edition of the Misk Academy 1 Hour Leadership Series. My name is Solveig Nicklos, and I'm the Director of Leadership at Misk Academy. I'm very excited for our conversation tonight, as I am one of those people who enjoys change, as I think it creates new opportunities. But I enjoy it more, as I think most people do, when I have the ability to discuss it and learn some new ideas and mental models that help make sense of what's going on, how we feel, and help us digest our new reality. That is why I'm excited for tonight's guest, John Sanei. I'm sorry, I think I've mispronounced that in the past, my apologies, is a knowledge mercenary who travels the globe to uncover the lessons needed to uplift communities and help humanity thrive. His unlimited fascination with the future has seen him become Africa's first faculty member at Singularity University in San Francisco, a lecturer at Duke Corporate Education in Johannesburg, and a partner associate at the Copenhagen Institute of Future Studies in Denmark. He's also author of the best-selling books, What's Your Moonshot, Magnetize, and Foresight, and most recently, Future Next. Despite his success, John still freely shares his passion and excitement through his signature videos. Find him online and start upgrading your perspective. So welcome, John. Thank you very much for being here.
My absolute pleasure. Always a wonderful privilege to be talking to people in the Middle East. I am Iranian by birth and my lineage, so always great to be adding value to that part of the world. Hello, everybody.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. I ask the audience as we go through the presentation or at the discussion, we'll be welcoming any questions. Please feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and I'll try to embed them within the conversation. So first, I should ask you, for the clarity of our audience, what do you do? What is a futurist?
Well, I think many futurists or trend specialists or human behavior specialists all kind of do the same thing. And everybody's kind of got their own way of doing it. But the way I do it is I categorize and contextualize the future to give people in positions of power or executives or people in government the opportunity to have more courage and more clarity to make decisions they weren't able to make previously. I do the categorization and contextualization very much based on the human need states and expectations we are seeing evolve. So all of us as human beings have these inherent need states, like we love things to be convenient. We love things to be seamless or personalized or trustworthy. So we have many different need states, and trends are always like sort of put on top of the need states and expectations. And then what you do is you build stories. You help execs and leaders see things that they haven't seen before and allow them an understanding that often most leaders are making decisions based on their past successes, not on their future opportunities. And there's a great saying from Dr. Joe Dispenza. He says, are you living a life based on a set of memories from your past, or are you living a life based on the vision of your future? So my mission in life is to help people develop a vision and drive towards it. And so that's the way I dissect the future for people.
Wonderful. And actually, I'm going to jump in. I wouldn't normally do this early, but we have a question from the audience. And I think Mohammed was on our last call as well. But how is that different than scenario planning?
So scenario planning almost gives you 4 different ways that you could develop businesses or you could develop your strategy. I'm not a fan of scenario planning. I know some people are. I feel that scenario planning gets you to toy with 4 different options, and at the end of it, all 4 could happen or couldn't happen. I like to much more build tomorrow teams, and I will get into this a little bit later, but maybe I can jump into it now. But the way I try and help organizations develop their future thinking is to develop today teams and tomorrow teams. And I allow the tomorrow teams to experiment and play and trial new things that normally would not ever be trialed in the today team. So for me, what you require is a team that focuses on today's business, making sure it's as efficient and profitable as possible, but you also need a team that's planting seeds for tomorrow and experimenting and playing. What scenario planning does, what I've seen, is set up 4 different scenarios for the today team, and they play around with them and they try them out and they kind of figure out which one they want to do, but actually nobody's experimenting properly. Nobody's got foot on the ground and really trying new things out. So I think scenario planning in such a complex world, in so many things that are changing, and we really have no idea the domino effects of bankruptcies, new socioeconomic systems, new health regulations, cyber threats. I mean, there's so many things happening. I definitely think that the best way, and the way I've seen many organizations see very big successes, is by developing a sole team that just focuses on tomorrow and experiments and plays there in the future.
Thank you. That's actually very helpful to contextualize what we're talking about. Now, jumping into, back to the main conversation, if you could share with us your experience and perspective on the world during and post-COVID, the kind of crazy world we're all living in right now.
Sure. So, my new book comes out soon, and in it, I start off with a line that says, "The future arrived sooner than any of us expected it to." It's almost like 2030 arrived 10 years too early. And we've been forced into the future. And not only in business modeling, but even in our own personas, what work we do, how we are and who we are, has been challenged in a very, very serious way. We've seen many marriages break up. We've seen businesses fall apart. We've seen socioeconomic systems being challenged. And so what COVID-19 has really done is it's brought about the end of an old world. And we see these cycles that happen with humanity every 80 years or so. And every 80 years, we have this massive shift, because what usually happens in these 80-year cycles is we have 4 generations that are born. And since the last time this happened, which was the late 1940s, early 1950s, where we had World War II that saw the end of an old structural world, we saw the birth of a new world in the 1950s, early 1950s, where we saw the start of the UN, the IMF, and all these new structures that were built in the 1950s. But then what happened after 20 years is that a new generation was born, and then another new generation was born, and then another new generation was born. And so now what we have is the death and destruction and sort of the implosion of the old world that we're in right now. And that is a very difficult process because people are not familiar with what's going on. Things are strange, things are difficult. And so what we have to do is we have to realize first and foremost that, look, the world is ending in a way that the sort of structural stories are being questioned. Why? Because it was almost the people that now are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s that set up the rules back then in the 50s and 60s when they were young. And now these rules have really kind of had their time, and we need new rules. We need new sets of thinking. So for me, what we have to realize first and foremost is if we zoom out and we look at the overarching cycles that we're feeling, we're in winter. But the opportunity here is what comes after winter? Spring. A whole new world is coming. A whole new renaissance is coming. And when we look at the 14th century and the Black Death, we see a world like in Europe that was so devastated that we had to really rethink everything back then. And we saw the end of feudalism, their capitalism of the day. We saw the wider dispersal of agricultural knowledge and really a whole new labor market that was birthed after the devastation of the Black Death. And then what we started to see was the Italian Renaissance. And the Italian Renaissance was now birthed after the destruction of this old world. And guess what? We will have another Renaissance. And this is now for us to start preparing for the Renaissance. So that's just giving you the overarching idea about these sort of cycles that we have. Sorry, the sun's coming through now here all of a sudden. So let me just move out a bit there. So what we have to do is we also have to realize that the world we come from is a linear industrial revolution world that is called the complicated world. The world that we're moving into now is a complex world. And I'll just quickly break these down for you because I think it's good to start with this sort of big approach to understanding what's going on. You see, a complicated world is a world that had linear innovation in it. It was something that you went from point A to point B to point C. And the thing about a complicated world is that you had patterns that repeated themselves. So you could use mathematics, automation, accounting, and Excel spreadsheets to figure your way out of a linear, innovative, complicated world. But now we move into a complex world. And because there's so many moving parts, this new complex world that we're moving into, the fundamental difference is that you have patterns that don't repeat themselves. So now what you have, that's why scenario planning doesn't work in a world that there's no patterns, like everything's just up in the air. So for me, it's this idea that if you understand that you cannot utilize automation, mathematics, accounting, and Excel spreadsheets when it comes to figuring your way out of a complex world. So we have to utilize new skills, new ways of solving problems. And so the biggest example I can give you is if you go to the airport and you put your suitcase into the conveyor belt, the suitcase gets to you on the plane in the most efficient, complicated manner. In other words, you have hardly any human beings. It's highly automated. It's highly efficient and gets your suitcase to you. Hopefully 95% of the time your suitcase gets to you because it's automated and it's got data points and those things work really well. But once you get onto the plane, now you're in a complex world. And on the plane, what you have is 4 engines when 1 is enough. 3 operating systems when 1 is enough. 3 pilots when 1 is enough. Why? Because when you're up there, you have no idea what's coming. So you don't know if the weather's going to be bad. You don't know if the pilot's going to die, an engine's going to go down, an operating system's going to go down, a bird's going to fly into your engine. So what you do is you prepare for complexity, which means that you're not about efficiency, you're about complexity. So we have to realize that if we built planes based on efficiency only, we would have a plane with 1 engine, no pilot, and 1 operating system, because that's exactly what the bag luggage conveyor belt does, right? So the world we're moving into is much more flying in the air than it is a luggage baggage conveyor belt. So we have to realize, 1, it's a season of winter, meaning that we have got a death and destruction of old ways of thinking. We have spring that's coming. We have a new renaissance that's coming. And in order for us to prepare, we must also realize that we're moving away from a complicated world and we are moving firmly into a complex world that really is very difficult to forecast.
Well, and that leads one of another question from our audience is, what tools are you suggesting to cope with the new world in terms of skills, mindset, technology, etc.?
Okay, so let's get stuck into mindset because I think this is really key. I'll give you 2 tool sets around mindsets that I utilized when COVID happened to me, because I speak in conferences, I travel around the world, and I had just closed one of the biggest deals I've ever had with a huge global company that I was going to do 12 cities around the world. And it was my biggest deal that I'd ever done. And I was so overjoyed by it. I started off at the first conference, which was in Amsterdam, and I was sitting in my hotel lobby waiting for my Uber to take me back to Dubai, where I was living at the time. And I got an email, string of 3 emails that canceled all of my conferences. I went from making a lot of money to absolutely none. So you must understand, I was hit really hard from it, as you can imagine, and many people were. So I started writing a new book, and this is why my new book is coming out in 6 weeks, because I've spent the last few months really diving into this book. And the first part of the book is around these mental tools and emotional tools. So the first emotional tool, a mental tool, I call mourning your future memories. Now, what do we mean by this? Firstly, let's understand that memories don't have time attached to them. Your brain, the part of your brain that carries memories, doesn't know it's the memories from the future or the past. It's just a memory that you have there. And the way we understand this is that if you've ever been through a breakup, you always mourn the future ideas and plans that you had with somebody else. The house you were going to build together, the children you were going to have with each other, the holidays you were going to go with each other. Those are the things you mourn. And so what we have to realize is collectively as humanity and the world, all of our futures got postponed, canceled, or just put on hold. So we all have to realize that it's very important to give ourselves the time to mourn these future memories. And if we don't mourn these future memories, we are still stuck waiting for normality to come back. And so the 5 stages of mourning are very well documented: denial, bargaining, anger, grief, and acceptance. And so many people are still stuck in denial or bargaining or anger because they wanted to go back to normal, but there is no normality going to come. There's going to be a brand new world that arrives. And we must also remember that COVID, we're not finished. You know, we might be halfway, maybe, I don't know, maybe a third of the way. I still think we've got another 2 years to go for us to really get ourselves out of this sort of the place we're in at the moment. So the first thing is realize that what we have to do is give ourselves the time to get to acceptance. Because at acceptance, you can now catalyze yourself into the future, preparing for spring. If you're not preparing for spring, you're stuck in winter. and you'll carry on being stuck in winter. And we know every disaster, every crisis brings about a bunch of new, amazing and powerful businesses. So you need to ask yourself, am I going to stay stuck in my memories of the past, or am I going to get ready for what's coming? So the first one is give yourself the luxury of time to mourn your future memories. The second one, I call survivor consciousness trigger points. In other words, all of us have been triggered by this COVID-19 scenario in very personal ways, very secretive ways almost. And I know this for myself because when I was writing the book, I also realized that I was being triggered by this COVID-19 in strange ways that I hadn't even realized. So survivor trigger consciousness point. So what does that mean? It means that all of us got triggered at different aspects of our body. You know, some of us got panicked and some of us got so happy because there were so many new things for us to create. So if we realize that there are two ways for us to approach the future, and there's two ways for us to get triggered by this uncertain future. The first way is called the drama triangle. And the drama triangle has three characteristics inside the triangle. The first characteristic is the victim. Oh, poor me. I can't believe this has happened to me. The world is against me. All my dreams have gone. How dare all my dreams go? So the victim mindset is the first one. And you know, it's quite secretive. Many people don't even say to other people that they're going through this, but they go through this. The second personality trait is the angry person. I'm angry with the government. I'm angry with China for the virus. I'm angry with my boss. I'm angry. I'm just angry with everything that's happening out there. And that also is not useful because it doesn't get anything moving, or it only gets moving things for short periods of time. And the third characteristic is sympathy. So people who sit on their couches and feel sorry for the world. And they often do this over and over, giving themselves permission to stew in their own sadness, but actually not doing anything to empower anybody. So we have a choice. If you're stuck in any of these three characteristics, you become aware that none of these characteristics actually allow you to catalyze yourself in the future. They're actually keeping you stuck in the past. The other characteristics, or the three other ones in the creator triangle, are victim. Instead of victim, you can become a creator. In other words, not why is this happening to me? What is the opportunity in this for me to express myself differently? Or I can move from anger to challenger. I want to challenge myself to be better. I want to challenge my country to be better. I want to be challenging my organization to be better. I want to challenge us to actually uplift ourselves to do something better. And the third characteristic is empathy, or the coach. Very different to sympathy, because sympathy says, I feel sorry for you. Empathy says, I feel what you're going through and I'm going to empower you. Very, very different. Oprah is a great example. She doesn't feel sympathy for women. She feels empathy for women. She wants to empower women. That's why she set up schools for women, and she does all the programs around women. So remember that sometimes being caught in the drama triangle is a secretive thing. We don't really want to tell too many people because it's embarrassing to tell people you're a victim. Unless all your other friends are victims, and then it's all nice for you to get together and also you can all feel sorry for yourselves together. But that's not going to help you catalyze yourself into the future. So when I was writing the book, I realized that I was suffering from a victim mindset in two very clear parts of my life. And one of them was social capital. Now, what social capital is, it's influence, it's online presence, it's all those sort of things. And I love Simon Sinek, and I watch Simon Sinek a lot. He's always been somebody I've looked up to. And Simon Sinek gets 25 million views and I get 10,000. And I sit there and I'm in my drama triangle, feeling sorry for myself, being angry with people that are watching his video, not my video, but God forbid, I won't tell anybody. It's just what's going on inside my head. And this is the thing, is that we don't realize we're often stuck in the drama triangle unless it's actually brought to the surface for us to deal with. So as we prepare for this complex world, what we have to realize is that our past is not as relevant anymore. And it's much more relevant for us to focus on where we're going. So if we don't mourn our future memories, we're still stuck in the past. And if we are stuck in the drama triangle, we are just wheel spinning. We're not actually getting any traction for us to start moving to the future. So those are the two mental models that I share, but I've got many others, and I think that's good for now.
It's very interesting. You mentioned that one of the things I've had a series of oddly interesting debates about, the new, getting back to normal, and a huge number of people fighting, saying, no, they expect it to be in a year or so. And I look back at just the small crisis, relatively speaking, that was 2007 and 8. And the number of globally disruptive platforms primarily, but that came out of that, and new ideas that came out of that, Uber, Airbnb being the two off the top of my head. And just out of such a relatively small crisis, although no one would have said that prior to January of this year, but now given the scale of this situation, this crisis, and it's a little bit of crystal ball gazing at this point, but kind of what sort of scale of change, what sort of major ideas do you see coming?
So firstly, I want to just say that we shouldn't be wanting to go back to normality. And we must question what normality was, because, so you've been driving on the highway, right? And you're driving and somebody zooms past you at 180 kilometers. And what's the first thing you think? Who's that crazy person who's going to kill somebody, right? And then you're still driving on the highway, and then a car's going really slowly, and then you have to overtake them. And what you're thinking? Who's this fool? Why are they driving so slowly? Don't they know that we need to keep moving? Do you know who's riding at the perfect speed? You. Only you, because that's what we do in life, right? We are the only ones that have it at the perfect speed. Everybody else is too fast or too slow, okay? That is exactly like our reality, is that we think that our normal was the perfect normal. You know the Goldilocks story? Don't make it too hot, don't make it too cold, don't make it too sour, don't make it too sweet. It's just what we have, and that's all we want. But let's think back to 150 years ago when slavery was normal. Or we know around the world, women weren't allowed to vote 100 years ago, and now Saudi's now coming out of that. But that wasn't a cool normal. That wasn't a good normal. But back then it was just normal. So we had child labor camps around the world 40 years ago. We had apartheid here in South Africa 25 years ago. And none of those things are normal. But back then they were. So we have to ask ourselves, what is not good right now? What's not good in our normal that we need to question, we need to ask, we need to prod? And so for me, this drive to go back to normality is our brains being lazy. Because what happens to our brains is we like familiarity. It almost gives us comfort to be in a comfort zone. But we all know that a comfort zone, nothing grows in a comfort zone. So my urge to you is not to seek normality, but to reimagine a new possible future. It's much more powerful to get this opportunity to catalyze ourselves into something new, something more transparent, fair, and just, rather than normal. Because what's normal? Okay, so that's normality. As far as what businesses are coming out and what we have to watch as far as consumer behavior is concerned, it's really interesting because we all know the Maslow hierarchy of needs, right? And so at the bottom of the Maslow hierarchy of needs is your health. Have you got enough food? Are you healthy yourself? Then it's your emotional health. Then it's your family's health. Then it's money or career. And then it's self-actualization, right? Now, before COVID-19, all of us were on the drive for self-actualization because we've taken care of our health and money and those sort of things. But all of a sudden, COVID-19 happened. And what happened is that the Maslow hierarchy of needs swapped upside down. All of a sudden, the most important thing was, are you going to be healthy enough to make it through COVID-19? That was never a question before. You weren't questioning whether you were healthy enough to live. Now, all of a sudden, you were. The second thing you were questioning is, my family going to make it through this? And the third was, how's my emotional health? Then it was, do I have enough money to see me through this? And finally was this idea about self-actualization. So we realized that the world we're moving into is going to be prioritizing three new things. And this is from a research paper from the New York Times that was looking at the idea of luxury. And this whole concept of luxury where we work to be able to buy a luxury. Because of COVID-19 and because of the challenges and uncertainty we have, they think that the new luxuries will be emotional health, financial health, and physical health. And we're starting to see that luxury now starts to become much more important of how well are you eating? Do you have any trauma that you need to be healing inside you? Because with so much time on your hands, old traumas were flaring up because of COVID-19. And so we need to realize that we need more cash flow. Actually in reserves, we don't need those 85 handbags. We actually need more cash in the bank to make sure that we can see ourselves through this. We already see Gucci has pulled out of the fashion show cycles in France. And we're starting to see more and more brands start to pull out of this idea of luxury as a destination and start to develop a process of services that give us a better opportunity to have emotional, physical, and financial well-being. So I would imagine any business that now starts to build out of this will take those three need states very seriously and really start to understand the changing dynamics of luxury.
Very interesting, thank you. And I want to jump back, if I may, to your the drama triangle you talked about, because one of our listeners, Hassam, has a question. What practical tools can help us get out of the drama triangle?
Such a good question. So what's it, Hassan? Is it Hassan?
Hossam.
Hossam, it's a great question, man. And so here's the thing. Firstly, it's awareness. I'm being triggered in an awareness, right? So that's the first thing, is that I am not weak and a servant to the drama triangle. I can become aware of it. Now, that's the first thing. But let's understand what makes us triggered. Is every single human being here in the world is made up of memories and stories. The software that we have going on inside our heads that creates our perspective that sees the world is based on our memories and stories. The memories we carry and the stories we tell ourselves. Now, they've done an experiment recently, and in some university, they figured out that 50% of our memories are false. I would even challenge that and think about it. All our memories are false. Which memory is really, really true? Because every memory that we have is just a story that we've held on to give ourselves further identity in this world. And so instead of trying to figure out which memory is false or not, what I've done in my world is try to go back and rethink and recalibrate my memories. In other words, my painful memories, I want to heal them, which means that I can change my memories. So that in other words, if I think, I'll give you a very personal story, and I've written about it, so I'm okay to share it. My father was not emotionally stable. He was violent with us and very moody and very angry. And after I don't know, many years of abuse from him, my mom, my brother, and I decided to run away from the house. And from 8 years old to 40 years old, I had a memory of my father that was one of disdain, of hatred, of anger, of what he had done to us. And at 40 years old, I realized that my father came from a violent family. He didn't understand and have the emotional tools to heal himself. And so he was a result of the world that he had come from. And I needed to become more empathetic to the world that he had come from. But here's the trick, or here's the big thing for me, is that from 8 years old to 40 years old, for 32 years, what I did was I attracted abusive alpha males in my life. Emotionally abusive, not physically. So every business I went into, I was partners with somebody that wasn't really that great. I would attract these abusive alpha males. Why? Because the stories and memories that I held was that alpha males are abusive and alpha males are not to be trusted. And the minute I healed that memory, I had no abusive alpha males in my life. In other words, my drama triangle got healed because I healed a memory. So my urge to you is 1, become aware of it. 2, seek some help. Get a psychologist to help you understand your memories, heal them so that you don't have to keep getting triggered and be put into the drama triangle for them.
Thank you very much for that. I'm going to switch gears just a little bit because obviously this series is about leadership, so I want to get your thoughts on that. And you've spoken about the future of leadership before, but can you unpack how this looks moving forward? And then we have a follow-up question from the audience about leadership as well.
So the future of leadership is a big, big topic at the moment. And so I've written about it extensively, but the future of leadership is not about it's not about practices. It's about new principles. And it's about a new, deep human philosophical conversation we need to have. And we kind of reach this point in any human endeavor, whether it's in science or whether it's in medicine or in climate change. We can't have people solving new problems using old ways. And so now it's starting to happen inside organizations and inside leadership on the whole. So as an organization, if our sort of principles are around bureaucracy, formalization, specialization, standardization, it's great if your goal is efficiency at scale. But if your goal is not efficiency at scale, you have to start talking about new principles because that's what we have to do. And so we realized that this complicated world required a type of leadership. And a complex world requires a brand new type of leadership. So obviously, the coronavirus has been an incredibly stern test for institutional adaptation and resilience, but it's certainly not the only challenge we're facing as leaders. We still have climate change. We still have ethnic conflict. We still have mass economic migration. We have cyber threats. We have job displacing automation. And the list goes on and on and on. But what most leaders want to do is they want their organization to seem agile, but they're unwilling to dedicate themselves to principles of autonomy, speed, transparency, meritocracy, or experimentation. It's almost like a dictator holding an election with all the trappings of democracy, but actually the spirit of democracy is actually missing. So we have to realize that as leaders, we have to move from economies of scale to economies of learning. In other words, the focus can't be efficiency, because that was what you needed to do in a complicated world. But in a complex world, it's really about unlearning to relearn as often as possible. We also have to realize that we're moving from hierarchical systems around the world to much more network systems around the world, which means leaders are not on top of people, they're with people. And also we have to realize is that the new type of leader is somebody that has power with and are not on top. And so this brings me to this idea of the future of work, because if we really think about the future of work, is in a complicated world, the future of work was a linear process, right? You went to school, you went to university, you got a great job, you got a promotion, you got another job, you studied something else, and you carried on moving up. But in a complex world, you don't know what the next step is going to be. And so it's very difficult to plan too far ahead. And so what I call this era we're in right now is the era of forced entrepreneurship. And what an entrepreneur is not somebody who just has his own or her own business, but somebody who's continuously solving problems. And inside organizations or outside organizations, we all have to adopt an entrepreneurial mindset, because it's an entrepreneur that thrives in a complex world. It's an employee stuck in linear thinking that gets triggered by a world that's changing too quickly. Because rightfully so, I went and studied for 6 years, I got my degree, and now you're telling me the world has changed? What about my degree? And so that becomes a very tough thing. So we have to realize is that the degrees are great, but they also need to start preparing us for a more complex world.
And as an add-on to that from one of the listeners who'd like to remain anonymous, do you think that the future of leadership in organizations is diminishing in light of the heavy reliance on artificial intelligence and the reduction of teamwork?
Well, I don't know if it's artificial intelligence that's taking leadership away. I think it's that we as human beings are becoming a lot more clicked in or linked in. We don't need to have somebody watching us all the time. If we're passionate about what we're doing, if we're goal-driven, we don't need somebody watching over us all the time, clocking in and clocking out. So I don't know if it's so much artificial intelligence, but more our development as beings. We are getting access to more information. We are becoming much more part of this new global world. So I don't think it's artificial intelligence. I think it's just us, we growing. And leaders also need to keep up with smarter people. You know, in the old days, the leader was the smartest person. Today, the leader's not always the smartest person. The leader's actually leading much smarter people than him or her. Because the smartest person in the room is often the person with a smartphone and a connection to Google. That person's very smart. And guess what? Everybody's very smart. So now your leading style has to change, because anything you say as a leader can now be challenged. It's like, hang on a second, I don't believe what you're saying. Let me just Google it quickly. So again, I don't think it's artificial intelligence. I think it's because we've got access to so much more information and we're all becoming a lot smarter.
Now you hear a lot and you see a lot of articles about resilience is a huge topic right now. How do you unpack this idea? What are your thoughts in that space?
Sure, yeah, good. So, I mean, about 5 years ago, what used to happen is I used to get asked to come and speak about innovation. And then about 3 years ago, it was come talk us about disruption. And then 2 years ago, it was about come talk to us about transformation. And today it's about come talk to us about resilience. It's almost like the world goes through these sort of, hot topics. And right now it's resilience. Now, the thing with resilience for me is that resilience is a trap and it's a deception. And let me explain. It's because there's three types of resilience. You have respond, you have recover, and you have reimagine. And what most people do is they're resilient in responding and recovering, but not in reimagining. And so what they do is they're resilient and holding on to the old world and saying, well, look, I'm resilient. I've held on to the old world. No, but that's not yes, that is a type of resilience, but that's a trap that stops you from evolving. And so we must be very careful that we don't get caught up in the idea that we must be resilient over everything else. We can make it through this. Yes, you can if you apply yourself to reimagining what the future could be and then working towards that rather than trying to keep the old world alive. So resilience for me is a wonderful characteristic to have, but mostly in the reimagine space. Because look, it's tough to reimagine continuously. It's tough to show up in an uncertain world where you don't really know what things are familiar. I mean, think about this, is that we're in a transformation, right? We're in a middle of a transformation. And you know, transformation also has 3 stages. It has the sad, the strange, and the adventure. And so the sad is when we have to leave something that was familiar, that we knew so well, that was kind of our comfort zone. And then we go into the strange where nothing is familiar. Nobody knows what's going on and everything's up in the air. And then eventually we'll get to the adventure again. Right now, we are in the no man's land. We are in the strange. And so we mustn't be too caught up in respond and recover. We must be much more focused on reimagine to start getting prepared for this renaissance, this spring, and this new world that's coming.
And we may have blurred the lines a little bit, but transformation is another thing that is it's almost like a buzzword. And
as well.
Right, as well. And so it's, how can we make that make more sense and make it more tangible?
Yeah, so again, this is the thing is around, if you look at the overarching, the cycles, and I started off with this, the spring, the summer, the autumn, and the winter. If we understand that the transformation we're in right now is winter, the best thing we can do is dress warmly. I mean, obviously that's a silly analogy, but what I'm trying to say is that if you know you're in winter, if you know you're in transformation, what you start doing is becoming kinder with yourself. You're becoming more patient with yourself. You become more patient with your team and your colleagues because you understand that nothing is familiar. Everything is strange and everything is new. So we have to apply ourselves in different ways. And what I've started doing is measuring my success in new ways. Because in the middle of a transformation, it's not always about making the highest sales. Anyway, not for me, but it's about learning new skills. It's about unlearning old skills. It's about developing new ways of thinking, redefining success, and getting ready for what's coming. Because once we move into spring, then transformation now is an adventure. And now we start moving with a new momentum and we start building more momentum moving forward. So it's really important that we understand that transformation is actually 3 words. Trans as in transition, for as in forward, as motion as in motion. So we transition forward motion at hyper speed right now, and we are right bang in the middle of it. So my answer to that question is be more kind, be more patient, because we need to be, because all of us are taking an emotional, it's a stressful situation. One other thing I can say on that is that if we think about our brain plasticity, the way our brains work, is that every time we start a task, we look for something called DPO, which is duration, path, and outcome. So every time we start a task, whether it's going to buy ice cream or going to do a race or going on a holiday, you know exactly the duration, what's going to happen on the path, and what the expected outcome is going to be. Today, we don't have DPO. There's no duration, path, and outcome. We don't know when this is really going to come. We don't know when it's going to end. We don't know what's going to happen on the path. So everybody's got this level of sort of a new type of fatigue, a new type of emotional strain that they're under because there's no DPO. We have no anchor point into the future. And because of this, again, we realize that we're in transformation. Being resilient, holding on to the past is not a good idea. And so we have to become more malleable, more adaptable, more patient, and realize that we won't get DPO for a little while still. So we must be okay with that.
Now, you mentioned in the answer to that question, you talked about learning skills. And so I'm curious, and this is a bit of a 2-part question. One for me, which is, what should we be learning in school? What should we be teaching our kids in school? And then a question from our audience from Hisham, how should organizations be developing their employees differently in order to deal with a complex world?
So let me start off with the corporate question. The corporate question for me is that The corporations that we're starting to see around the world that are doing really well are setting themselves up in two parallel businesses. They have the today team and the tomorrow team. They have the people that are focused on the complicated world, and they have the people focused on the complex world. And we see like Japan Airlines, for example, has spent $70 million developing the future of travel. And the future of travel has got absolutely nothing to do with a plane or an engineer or an airport. It's got to do with a VR headset and a visceral suit that you wear, that you can feel heat or a bump or wind or cold or whatever the case may be. And now what they're realizing that they can make people travel without ever leaving their house. And so they're already using it with paraplegic people that are in hospital beds or in wheelchairs that are now able to have the sensation of walking at the bottom of the ocean or the top of the mountain or in New York or wherever they want to go. And eventually they'll start to utilize this as another option of travel. Now, they were doing this before COVID-19. And look what's happened with COVID-19 is that business travel has been cut by 80%. And most people think it's not going to ever go back to what it used to be, because now we become used to Zoom. We become used to so many new technologies. And going back to your question, what sort of businesses will grow? Definitely Zooms of the world will become much better, much more interactive and much more realistic. So we don't have to travel. So as far as corporations are concerned, what I would suggest is that corporations look at finding today teams and tomorrow teams, running parallel businesses. And so the skills are different in both of those. The skills here are all about efficiency, all about profitability, all about complications. The skills here, robustness, experimentation, and adaptation. So very different skill sets are required. So let's go back to kids. So what should we be teaching kids in school? Now, very difficult, because we have to realize that many of the things that we're being taught at school are often going to become irrelevant or available ubiquitously through Google. For example, studying anything in history and memorizing it is a pointless exercise, because you can Google anything you want at a tip of a button. So really what we have to realize is that in a complex world, the best skill sets that we will require are ones of empathy, passion, storytelling, grit, these internal emotional skill sets that often are never taught to us. Now, I'm going to give you three examples. And three examples of stuff that we've been researching at Singularity University. The first one is, how do you teach your child passion? And this is a tough one, because how do you teach passion? But actually it's quite simple, because the way you teach passion is through exposure. If you're not being exposed to many different types of careers, many different opportunities in business, how do you know what you're passionate about? And when we were growing up, and I'm sure you'll agree, when we were growing up, our moms and dads were the only two careers we knew about, right? So my dad was a teacher, my mom was a secretary. I didn't know about any other careers. Then I met some of my friends' parents, and they also like a doctor. So I had an opportunity of maybe 5 or 6 careers that I could choose, because I just wasn't exposed to any others. And so what happened was I chose the ones that my mom and dad wanted me to do, not the ones I was passionate about. That was the last thing on the table. So our kids need to be passionate about what they're doing, because the world is complex. It's not complicated. So if we don't have passion for what we're doing, we could become very depressed or give up very easily. So how do you teach passion? The way we think you should be teaching passion at Singularity University is your child should get a task to dissect a career every 2 weeks. They must take a one career. Maybe it's a doctor, maybe it's a data scientist, maybe it's a speaker, maybe it's an author, whatever the case may be. And they must give you a 10-minute presentation on the pros and cons of that career, and parts of that career they like and don't like. Now, what happens if you do this for 6 weeks, your child has got now 3 new careers they could be more passionate about or less passionate about. And you do this over 12 months. Now your child has got dozens of different jobs to look at and careers to look at to see which one am I passionate about and which am I not. So that's the first one, passion. The second one is grit. And unfortunately, we live in a world where many of the young people live in an Instagram world where things must happen overnight, like this, click, 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 they must happen quickly. And so many of the young people don't have grit. And so another exercise is taking the life of a successful entrepreneur and breaking down that successful entrepreneur's life and then presenting to you what that entrepreneur's life was like. Because 100% of the time, that entrepreneur has gone through ups and bankruptcies and sicknesses before they've actually become successful. And many people don't even give that much like focus onto that. So developing grit is really done through a process of research, looking at certain entrepreneurs and presenting on those entrepreneurs. And the third one, and I think really important, is this idea of storytelling. Is many kids are shy and they don't want to speak in front of people. But guess what? In a world of digitization, you have to speak to people. It's a big part of who you are and how you do storytelling. So again, one of the major things we drive at Singularity University is kids to start doing talks about things they're passionate about just for 5 minutes every month. And that process gets them to become more and more comfortable with them becoming storytellers. So the future of our lives really depend on this ability to be passionate about what we're doing, is to have the grit to stick to it, to be a storyteller, to get other people to join our mission, to have more empathy, and to become much more aware and thriving in a complex world rather than preparing for a complicated one.
And to that point of skill development, one of the listeners wants to know, how do we set up our mindset to be a futurist and not lose it? How do we continue that level of thought process and curiosity?
So look, for me, it comes as a natural extension to my personality. It's just who I am. I've always been doing it from a very young age. I was always an early adopter. So it's just what I could always do. Some people are more comfortable being in today teams, and you don't have to be in a tomorrow team, but you need to partner with people who are in tomorrow teams and in today teams. I've got 3 businesses, and in all 3 businesses, I'm the tomorrow team. And I've got my partners who are today teams. Now, if I didn't have them, my businesses would never be successful. And if they didn't have me, they would never be successful. So the question is, are you naturally inclined to look at the future with excitement and try and connect invisible dots that nobody else can see? Then great, carry on. If you're not, then maybe you're just a tomorrow team participant. And that's as necessary as a tomorrow team. So today and tomorrow teams, it depends where you want to play and where you're comfortable at.
Which actually I think leads nicely to we've had some more questions from Mazen and Ahmed, both along the ideas of leadership. One, I think we need more than at any time in the past to lead with emotional intelligence. What your reflections on that? And then the other question, what type of leadership will organizations of the future look for?
Sorry, what was the second question? Say that again.
What type of leadership will organizations of the future look for?
Sure. Okay. So the first question, and I think it's a good one, is that we must realize in agricultural times, the most important thing we could have was muscles and brawn, because we needed to toil the soil, understand the seasons, and make sure we survive by growing our own vegetables and fruit. And then we got into the Industrial Revolution, and the most important thing was intelligence, because we needed to work our way throughout a process of complicated solutions. Now the world we're moving into requires intuition. So we've gone from brawn to intelligence to intuition. In other words, from muscles to brains to heart. So the question is absolutely, EQ is by far one of the most important things we could have as leaders, but not just as leaders, as anybody. So what creates calm, elegant EQ? Healing your memories. It's as simple as that. The reason that we aren't able to have an EQ that's very high is that we get triggered. And we all know we are super calm for 95% of the time, and then somebody does something and we get crazy. We get angry, we get sulky, we get jealous, we cry. Why? It's triggered something inside us. And then what we do is we get into the drama triangle and blame that person for that. But the truth is you got triggered. Whatever that person did, if they did it to somebody else, they wouldn't have been triggered like you were triggered, which means that you're carrying the memories that are being triggered by that. So for me, it's EQ, obviously very high and very necessary for all of us. But ultimately, don't all of us want an elegant, abundant, and seamless life? All of us do. We want more than enough money for our families. We want to live a seamless life. We want to be elegant in our approach. And the way we do that is by healing our past and becoming much more aware of that and how it triggers us in our survivor consciousness points. Now, the question of what sort of leaders the companies of the future will look for. Again, remember that all companies require to have complicated leaders and complex leaders. They don't all need one type of leader. We need different types of leaders. So if you look at a sports team, for example, you have a team, a coach that does the forwards in rugby, and you have a coach that does the defense in rugby, because they're totally different skill sets. You can't have one that's doing both of them. So the question is not a universal, this type of leader. It's what sort of person are you? How can you become the best version of you? how can you become so impassioned about what you do that not only will the company want to hire you, but want to partner you? Why would that not be an option? And also, if you're really, really good at being a today team, then focus on that and become the best leader you can. But if you want to be part of the tomorrow team, then focus on cultivating those sort of skill sets and those sort of leadership characteristics.
And I think I'm going to shift gears just slightly, but I think I can probably guess a little your answer about this. But do you agree that one of the benefits of COVID is that it's accelerating change? Usually there's a lot of resistance to change moving forward. However, nowadays you need to change to survive. This is Mohammed again asking, he is curious.
Yeah, of course. I mean, look, change is the constant. Now it's just happening at hyper speed. And so welcome to the future. We didn't know this was going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen next year or the year after that. And so we have to become very comfortable with this idea that it's okay to be challenged. It's called being anti-fragile. It's called having a growth mindset. And so let's break these two down because I think it's really important for us to understand this. Nassim Taleb wrote a book that became a New York Times bestseller called Anti-Fragile. And what he says in there, he says that if you drop something that's fragile, it breaks. If you drop something that's anti-fragile, it gets stronger. That's exactly the same as growth mindset. A growth mindset says, I cherish challenges. I love being put into a corner and having to find my way out. Now, what happens to us as human beings is we get dopamine when we achieve a task. And so what we often do is we only allow ourselves to access the dopamine once we've achieved the task. Whereas what we should be doing is giving ourselves the opportunity to get dopamine through the task. And so when we become very keen and we get enthusiastic about solving problems, we then now have a growth mindset and an anti-fragile approach. Now, the research that they got to get the growth mindset book written by Carol Dweck, she was watching some young kids in their 12, 13 years old trying to solve some mathematical problems. And they knew they weren't able to solve them, but they were loving the process. And she realized that it's in loving the challenge that makes you a very powerful person. And most of us want to be in comfort zones. We don't want to be challenged. We just want things to be as they always were. And what happens is we become stuck in the past. We become stuck in a complicated world. We never actually move into a complex world. Now, they did another test, and they had children that loved art. And they were intrinsically giving themselves dopamine because they just enjoyed art. Then all of a sudden, the teacher started giving them gold stars. And so the kids started enjoying art and gold stars. But when the teacher started taking the gold stars away, they stopped enjoying art. Why? Because they changed their dopamine inside their head from an intrinsic hit to an extrinsic hit. So we have to realize that we need to shift the way we access dopamine and become happy with challenges, happy with becoming anti-fragile, and all adopt a growth mindset. Because truth is, you don't have a choice. The world is changing at hyper speed. And next year, we might have aliens landing. Who knows? Nothing is off the cards right now.
Yeah, you really can't argue with anything at this point. I have another question related to the idea of the business shift towards the idea of greater focus on social responsibility as a core business driver. And I'm curious to know kind of how you're seeing that and where that's going. Question
close to my heart. My new book is all about this. And I think that what's happened is that we have become stuck in the doctrine of growth over everything else, at the expense of our health, at the expense of the planet, at the expense of time with our families, at the expense of everything as long as we have growth. And that is just a ridiculous notion. Look, it did well for us as human beings to get us to this point, but right now it's killing the earth. I mean, it's just killing everything around us, just at the doctrine of growth. So we're starting to see some major moves around the world, which I'm so very happy about. In America, a guy called Jamie Dimon, the CEO and chairman of Chase Bank, which is the largest bank in the States, has started to rewrite the rules of profit sharing. And him and another 180 CEOs have gotten together to start rewriting the rules from shareholder focus to stakeholder focus. In other words, we don't want to prioritize shareholders, we want to prioritize stakeholders. So what are stakeholders? Stakeholders are employees, communities, your local communities, shareholders, and consumers. In that order, employees first, communities second, shareholders third, consumers fourth. Now, what we do then is we prioritize the well-being of the people that are inside the village that's trying to get this business to be successful. Already, that is already social upliftment. The second thing we want to do in those sort of businesses is uplift the community around us. Why wouldn't we want to uplift the community around us? Because if more people in the community have more money, guess what happens to our business? They have more people spending. So our business gets better because more people in the community have more money. And then obviously as shareholders must get their money. And it's important for us to re-look at the model of business and say, look, are we here for the short term or are we here for the long term? Are we here to destroy the planet so that we can have more profit, or are we here to leave a planet to our children that we're proud of? And so we have to realize is that the ideology or the doctrine or the story that we're following right now that is faulty, the one that I explained earlier that, slavery and all those old ones that didn't make any sense, the story that we need to question today is it worth it for us to drive ourselves to anxiousness, to stress, to resentment for profit? And then what? And then you get the money and you buy something and then what? You're back into stress and back into anxiousness and back into resentment. So we have to really rethink this idea of growth over everything else and start to think like mature adults. Because what mature adults do are think long-term. And in fact, should I say mature female adults, much more. No offense to the men out there, I'm also a man, but your mother has got a much longer term of ways of thinking about things, So we're starting to see the rise of the feminine consciousness around the world as well, which I think is very healthy. For the last 1,000 years, it's been a very masculine dominated world. And we're starting to see the rise of the feminine consciousness, which I think is fantastic. And that balance will get us to be in a very, very great world, I hope. And that's my intention.
And that leads me, what will probably be the last kind of part of the discussion, but Maya asked the question, what does it take about building mental toughness in a way to deal with pressure and challenge? But I think based on your previous answer, it may be, how do we shift that mindset from that? But I'll leave it to you to make that connection.
Well, look, if you're not passionate about what you're doing, you're in the wrong place. And so if you're passionate about what you're doing, you enjoy challenges. If you're not passionate about what you're doing and you're doing it because it's a box that you've ticked, it's a degree that you have, it's a job that you're in, then it's a stressful situation. Then it is tough. And it is something it just doesn't have that flow state in it. So the way to become anti-fragile easily is to follow your curiosity and excitement and just follow that, because that will be more than enough to see you crave challenges, to look for new opportunities to bring new solutions to the world. If you're only doing something with your brain and not your heart, then all challenges are tough because it just puts too much strain on your brain. But if you're running with intuition and you're running with excitement and you're running with curiosity, then it becomes a wonderful opportunity for you to express yourself in new ways and in new dynamic ways to thrive in the future.
Well, and unfortunately, I think that will have to be our last question. We have at least 20 more, so I apologize to everyone who posted them that I did not get to. I did get one question I can answer now, which is, yes, this webinar will be available. It will be slightly edited and made prettier, but then it'll be posted on the Misk Academy social media platforms. So please, we encourage everyone to go looking for that. And with that, I thank our wonderful speaker tonight, John. It's been incredibly interesting, and I didn't know if you wanted to leave us with any last thoughts.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. Look, where we are right now is not easy. It's not going to be easy for a while. It's going to be unfamiliar. We're in the strange part of the transformation. But you need to ask yourself one fundamental question. Are you holding on to old stories, or are you preparing for the new renaissance that's coming? And it's up to you. Nobody else can force you. It's your incredible privilege of choice to say, I'm stuck in the old world or I'm preparing for the new one. So thank you so much for joining me. I really have enjoyed this. If you want to get any of more of your questions answered, please follow me on Instagram. I'm happy to answer any there. I have a lot of people asking me questions. So my name is John Sanei. There's only one, thank goodness, out of 7.5 billion people. Imagine that. And so, yes, I'll answer any of your questions there if we didn't get to them now. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to talk to you tonight.
Okay. Bye-bye.